Hello there. Thank you for joining me today. Today I made a major discovery. I got some loose ends to pull together. I was writing a piece for somebody that I wanted to express what I know so far about all this nuclear business. So let me just read what I wrote. I titled it Smokers versus Parkinson. I have lung cancer. In 2019, I pulled myself out of the medical system. I am confident there has been a lot of confusion over smoking and lung cancer. I am also sure that a lot of cancers come from the environment. Maybe most miss the details, but they have never come up with a plan to store nuclear, literally leaving it all over the environment if one takes the time to understand the issues. I think, like sugar, they conspired early on to get ahead of what is now a huge increase in lung cancer. Blame it on the smokers. I clearly lack your science skills, but I encourage you to consider that some of the cancers may be getting worse with sugar, but there is also another root cause to consider. See, I no longer believe that sugar is a root cause. Okay, so let me keep reading here. It is in the air and all around us, and it is in our water. Testing now shows high levels of plutonium in the water. Is sugar the accelerant? The match that lights that cancer fire? I asked GT, I asked Chat GPT, I asked this question. There is a town I read about where the residents were all getting Parkinson's from the chemical environment in the area. I did a short exploration to recap of what I found interesting. ChatGPT said, that sounds similar to cases where industrial pollution or environmental contamination has been linked to neurogenerated diseases like Parkinson's. One well-known example is Camp Lejeune, where contaminated water was linked to several health issues, including Parkinson's. There have been reports of clusters of Parkinson's cases in certain U.S. towns where industrial chemicals, pesticides, or contaminated water sources were present. There's this thing called trichlorine. It is a solvent used in dry cleaning and manufacturing and has been strongly linked to Parkinson's in some studies. And then ChatGPT asked me, do you remember the name of the town or more details? I can help you look it up. And I said, I need more details because I forgot the town, right? ChatGPT said, environmental exposure to certain chemicals has been linked to clusters of Parkinson's disease in various communities. One notable example involves the solvent trichlorine, commonly used in dry cleaning, in that research suggests that TCE exposure may increase the risk. In a specific case, a cluster of Parkinson's was identified among attorneys working near a contaminated site. This study highlighted the potential connection between TCE, that trichlorine stuff, exposure, and the development of Parkinson's disease. Additionally, concerns have been raised in communities near former industrial sites. For instance, residents living downhill from the former Ithaca gun factory in Ithaca, New York, have reported cases of Parkinson's disease potentially linked to historical TCE contamination. These instances underscore the importance of monitoring and addressing. Okay, yeah, I got that. Okay, so, and then I asked another question. I said, what I found interesting is people who smoked were not getting sick like everyone else. And ChatGPT said, that's a really interesting detail. There have been some studies suggesting that smokers may have a lower risk of developing Parkinson's disease compared to non smokers. This is known as the smoker's paradox. Why would smoking protect against Parkinson's? Nicotine's effect on dopamine. Parkinson's disease is caused by the lack of dopamine producing neurons in the brain. Nicotine stimulates dopamine release, which might offer some neuroprotection. Toxic exposure differences. If a town was exposed to a chemical like this TCE, smokers may have been less exposed Well, because they spent more time indoors or had altered breathing patterns. Nicotine's anti-inflammatory properties. Some researchers suggest nicotine reduces brain inflammation, which is a key factor in Parkinson's. Genetic or lifestyle factors. It could also be that people who smoke have different genetic traits that make them less susceptible. Is this a reason to smoke? Even though smoking might lower Parkinson's risk, it still causes lung disease, heart problems, and cancer. Well, lung disease, heart problems, and cancer, sugar, right? Some researchers are exploring nicotine patches or other safer alternatives for potential Parkinson's. So they're now recommending nicotine patches if you have Parkinson's. So I continued my discussion. I went on to say, I do not have a history of long-term smoking outside of social events. I am treating my cancer with single source food and marijuana. Before you start thinking I am some criminal, they passed a farm bill law in 2018, which makes it legal in the United States. And then I wanted to say fluoride in our water. Fluoride is a runoff from nuclear. Are we also drinking plutonium? Fluoridated drinking water with recovered plutonium is a cost-effective means of disposing of toxic waste. The fluoric acid would otherwise be classified as a hazardous toxic waste on the Superfund priorities list of toxic substances that poses the most significant risk to human health and the greatest potential liability for manufacturers. So fluoride, I did a whole show about fluoride, so I'm not going to go there now, but fluoride essentially is runoff from the nuclear energy. So I went on to say, I read about smoking not being what we think. I thought about buying some cigarettes, but not being desperate enough. I thought, why not give it a whirl? So I thought, I have some weed that is organic that I have avoided because of the bad information about smoking and lung cancer. Yeah, I had some, when I first started working with marijuana as medicine, I was using marijuana and I was decarbonating it and using it, mixing it in food and stuff. Well, then I switched to distillants. So one day when I did that show recently about smoking being kind of a hoax, I thought, well, wait a minute, I've got some organic weed here in the cupboard. Why don't I try that? Because I hadn't smoked it before because I thought I might make my cancer worse, right? So that's where I said, I read about smoking not being what we think it is. I thought about buying some cigarettes, not being desperate, but thought, why not give it a whirl? So I thought I have some weed that is organic that I've avoided because of my fear of lung cancer and smoking. Smoking organic weed is what I'm doing to treat my lung cancer. Something is working. I am still alive and a few years down the road. Before I found you, I was on my own to try to figure all this out. We all need to understand the magnificent and self-healing bodies we have. Sleep and the correct food have been key for me. They lied about sugar in our hearts. I don't find it a stretch to think they are using tobacco also as a trick. It also makes it harder for lung cancer patients when most think they might deserve lung cancer, even if they only smoked or no longer do, because people blame the cancer victim, right, thinking they smoke. A so-called well-respected university and some people being paid off. Just my thoughts. I think it is in our environment, and sugar ignites the fire. We have actual plutonium in our water. It is found now in water worldwide. Are we first giving ourselves cancer with water that we are drinking? Is that the connection? I don't know. So I think that likely we're getting all these cancers. We're getting these cancers because the plutonium is in the water. I've been talking about this for ages now. I've done shows about the testing of the water. And you really can't trust those people like they have those Berkey machines and stuff because they've been caught lying about their test results. From what I understand, the only way to knock that plutonium out of your water is by distilling it. and I'll put a link down below. You can buy distilling machines and distill your own water in your own house. So, yeah, I think that probably that is the connection. They colluded during the war because war was just a cover for why they needed the plutonium, right? Then they cooked up this deal to put it in our water by claiming it was for our teeth. And I wasn't going to take pictures of my teeth because it's quite disturbing, but I've been posting pictures of what I currently look like over on my website under my smart meter tab. And I have, well, I can show you in a very disturbing way what all of this has done to my teeth. And yeah, it all makes sense because my teeth are under such attack. And it's interesting because they're kind of like peeling away. Yeah, they're falling out and they're peeling away. It's kind of interesting to look at. And how I'm dealing with all this is I do it like I'm an observer. Like I look at my teeth and think, oh, wow, those teeth. But I do it like they're not really my teeth. You know what I mean? Because this whole thing, I've got lung cancer, I've got radiation. This whole thing could be a bit overwhelming. So I tackle that by staying busy. And I also tackle that by trying to be an observer of what's going on versus oh my God, what's going on next? What's happening next? So this is where the connection needs to be made. I believe, full stop, it's coming from the environment and the sugar that they colluded to put in all of our food. If this isn't about eugenics, then why don't you explain to me why we have plutonium in all of our water, why we have sugar in every single thing that we want to take a bite out of? They did all that on purpose. That is how eugenics work. But anyway, so I'm going to be going along here. I have to close off this file. I will attach I recorded oh, maybe I'm a little confused today. You'll have to excuse me. I thought I knew what I needed to know about fluoride. And when I was looking to send this information to somebody, what I discovered was this huge missing link about what happened with the Manhattan Project. And I'm going to be inserting that here because I found this old piece about this. And what it was talking about was is that it'll play right now. Somebody uncovered all this documentation from the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project, it's called How the Manhattan Project Sold Us Fluoride, The Fluoride Deception by Christopher Bryson. I found bits and pieces that I put together. I will paste all of this down below, the report that I'm reading and also all of the things that I just read to you in my show notes so you can have access to all of this information and take a look for yourself. Do you agree with me? Do you think that the plot got started around the Cold War once they figured out plutonium? Well, of course it did. But what does it say to you? Does it say to you that this is the act of eugenics or this is the act of people who really care about us? I'm trying to tell you about the personalities of the people in charge. I hope that will inform your decisions for how you plan to protect yourself and your family moving forward. So be safe out there. Goodbye for now. This is going to be about how the Manhattan Project sold us fluoride. Newburgh had become the only second place in the United States to artificially add fluoride to public water supplies. Last week came news that fluoride is to be tried out with whole towns as guinea pigs. Time magazine announced approvingly in April 1944, the magazine suggested that where fluoride was found naturally in the groundwater, dentists' chief occupation is holding citizens' mouths open by displaying their perfect teeth. It wasn't just teeth the doctors were interested in. The Newburgh-Kingston fluoride caries trial, as it was formerly known, was considered the most extensive of the several fluoride experiments then being planned around the United States. Over a period of 10 years, a team from the New York State Department of Health would conduct a battery of psychological exams and x-rays on the Newburgh children, plus measuring their blood, urine, height, and weight. The information would be compared with data from children in the neighboring fluoride-free towns of Kingston, New York. The news that Newburgh would host the experiment created a buzz among local citizens. The gritty, blue-collar industrial town was home to a large population of immigrant Italian Americans as well as African Americans who had come from the South. Most considered themselves fortunate to be early recipients of a new public health measure. I can remember a lot of excitement as a young child, remembered a lifelong Newburgh resident and former Mayor Aubrey Carey, who regularly attended the Broadway Clinic in 1945 as a child. Carrie's parents were poor, she explained. Her father became only the second African American on the Newburgh police force, and the family was grateful for the daughter's free health care checkups. In the front room, there was a dental chair, and someone would check, and some, excuse me. In the front room, there was a dental chair, and someone would check your teeth, and you would see the nurse, Carrie recalled. You would have your height, your weight measured, and they would do some urine. I can remember that occurring every month of the year for a very long time. The tests were designed to answer a simple safety question, whether the chemical produced non-dental health problems, a medical agenda that, of course, not publicized to local citizens. Are there any cumulative effects, beneficial or otherwise, on tissues and organs other than the teeth, or long continued ingestion of such small concentrations of fluoride? The doctors explained to their colleagues in various academic publications and conferences on the topic. Some of the most powerful voices in the nation were asked similar questions about fluoride's toxicity with wartime urgency. Early in the fall of 1943, President Roosevelt, a science advisor, James Conant, had organized a major conference on fluoride metabolism, secretly convened on behalf of the Manhattan Project. The conference was held on January the 6th, 1944 in New York City, and conference transcripts and letters from Conant are among the first documents that connect the atomic bomb program to water fluoridation and to the Public Health Service. Weapons makers wanted to use the Public Health Service as a wartime camouflage, a fig leaf for the atomic bomb. In a letter dated September 25th, 1943, Conant explained to the chief of the Division of Industrial Hygiene, J.J. Townsend, that a consultant, Dr. Stafford Warren, would secretly provide the conference financing. This consultant, of course, was none other than Colonel Stafford Warren, the Manhattan Project's medical director. It is sincerely hoped that the Public Health Service will be willing to sponsor the conference and to send out invitation to the contributors under its own letterhead, Conant wrote to Townsend. All the arrangements, such as a selection of the speakers, will be taken care of by Dr. Warren. The purpose of this letter, Conant added, is to assure you of the importance of this symposium and the real need for the information in connection with the war effort. However, the picture of the purpose of the meeting is for your information only, and it is desired that the impression be given that the interest is in industry hazards only. Dr. Townsend replied that if the Public Health Service would review the agenda and the qualifications of the individuals who might be invited to attend, the Surgeon General would be very glad to call such a conference. On January the 6th, 1944, a who's who of the wartime fluoride industry passed through the doors of New York Hotel, Pennsylvania, mingling with the top medical men from the Army and from the companies and universities building the atomic bomb, including DuPont, Union Carbide, Columbia, and Johns Hopkins. Attending were Alcoa's top fluoride expert, Francis Frey, Helmut Schrenk from the Bureau of Mines, the biochemist Wallace Armstrong from the University of Minnesota, and Edward J. Largent from the Kettering Laboratory. Dr. Paul A. Neal of the National Institutes of Health outlined the critical importance of fluoride in the war economy and emphasized how little doctors know about health effects on workers. Aluminum, magnesium, refrigerants, aerosol propellants, insecticides, phosphates for animal feeds, hydrofluoride acid, especially its use as a catalyst in oil refining, and the employment of fluoride fluxes from an estimated 150,000 welders were just some of the burgeoning uses for fluoride in the war effort, Neal reported. There was a definite need, he added, for careful, thorough investigation on workmen who have been exposed for many years to fluorides. However, it has been postponed until after the war, since such an investigation could hardly be made at this time without undue interruption of the output of these industries. The conference organizers had made what seemed to be a surprising addition to the guest list. Dr. David B. Ast, A.S.T., Chief Dental Officer of the New York State Health Department. Dr. Ast was then preparing to add sodium fluoride to the drinking water of Newburgh, New York, in a stated bid to improve dental health in children. Although the conference had been secretly arranged by the Manhattan Project, whose industrial contractors were concerned that workers in bomb factories would be poisoned by fluoride, the dental researcher quickly justified his attendance at the conference. Military officials and industrial contractors heard a conference report that animal tests were a doubtful value in studying fluoride toxicity in humans, and that there was confusion over amounts and may cause deleterious effects in adults. Dr. Ast then boldly volunteered a solution. He suggested that researchers could examine whether fluoride in drinking water was harmful to people and thereby help to determine whether the chemical posed a risk to workers in factories. The accumulated effects of small doses of fluoride in drinking water could be studied in the U.S., and that the evidence of the effects of consumption of fluoride over that period of time might become apparent, Ants told the conference. Until such human fluoride studies could be done, however, temporary workplace standards had to be fixed. Following the morning conference session, the Manhattan Project had arranged a luncheon for 10 persons who will meet to set standards. It is not clear if the 10 men who met for lunch that day, including the Public Health Service's H. Trendy Dean, the researcher who had reported that fluoride found naturally in water in some areas of the country was associated with fewer cavities in the teeth. They knew that their meal was paid for by the they did not know that their meal was paid for by the Manhattan Project. But Howard Hodge knew. He paid the lab with bomb program funds. It would be convenient if cash could be provided and delivered here by Dr. Harold Hodge, the Manhattan Project Captain Ferry had ordered. A sacrifice was needed from war workers, the lunch team decided. Although earlier that morning, DuPont and Dr. A.N. Benny had described how part per million of hydrogen fluoride in an air-etched glass in 2 hours. The diners determined that 6 parts per million of fluoride breathed in factory air would be the wartime fluoride standard for an 8-hour workday. You see how they figured this out? They just sat around and guessed, right? So, the existing 3 p.m. threshold in several states wasn't, I guess that was the 3 ppm threshold in several states was an arbitrary figure not based on any specific evidence, stated Dr. Carl Volig of the University of Rochester, who chaired the lunch session. We do not want to set up standards that are so extreme on the lower side that it makes it hard to operate the plants, Volig added. We can say that in the absence of definite evidence, we feel, emphasis on original. Francis Ferry of the Aluminum Company of America doubted whether standards were even necessary. The best guide is the individual response, suggested Frey, explaining that I doubt in the case of man whether there is enough hydrofluoric acid in the air that is comfortable to breathe that would cause any damage. Hodge finessed the problem, suggesting that we can also say that men working in plants where we know the atmosphere is varied at all times should, by certain screening methods, be protected. A lone dissent drifted across the lunch table. I think that someone is going to be hurt by the long exposure to the irritant, interposed Dr. Wallace Armstrong from the University of Minnesota. Following the New York conference, as the giant gaseous diffusion plant secretly rose amid the virgin woodland in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, planning for the public water fluoridation experiment. A technical advisory committee was selected to guide the New York Health Department. The chairman of the expert committee, it was announced, would be a pharmacologist from the University of Rochester, Dr. Harold Hodge. Possible toxic effects of fluoride were in the forefront of consideration, the advisory committee stated. On May the 2nd, 1945, the Hudson River City became the second community in the world to be artificially fluoridated. In the next 10 years, its residents were studied by the New York State Health Department. Secretly, in tandem with the state's public investigation, Hodges classified Program F at the University of Rochester conducted its own studies, measuring how much fluoride Newburgh citizens retained in their blood and tissues, key information sought by the atomic bomb program. Health Department personnel cooperated, shipping blood and placenta samples to the Rochester scientists. The samples were collected by Dr. David B. Overton, the department's chief of pediatric studies at Newburgh. Hodge was not the only scientist associated with the Newburgh experiment who had ties to the bomb program. Dr. Henry L. Barnett, who joined the Technical Advisory Committee after the war, was described as a pediatrician. But Barnett had also been a Manhattan Project medical captain sent to Japan following the nuclear bombings as a leading member of the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission. And Dr. Joe Howland, who drew control samples of blood from residents of Rochester, New York, where no fluoride had been added to water supplies, for a comparison with fluoride levels in the blood of Newburgh citizens, was an especially practiced human experimenter. On April the 10th, 1945, for example, as chief of Manhattan Project Medical Investigations, research for information on the health effects of bomb program materials, Captain Howland had driven a plutonium-laden needle into the arm of Eb Cade, a unsuspecting victim of a Tennessee car accident who had the simple misfortune of landing in the Oak Ridge Hospital. Although Dr. David Ast of the New York Health Department clearly realized that water fluoridation would give industry useful information about fluoride's health effect on humans, as evidenced by the testimony at the Manhattan Project's 1943 conference on fluoride metabolism. Today, he maintains that he did not know about the Manhattan Project's involvement at all. If I had known, I would have been certainly investigating why and what the connection with what the connection was, Dr. Ast told me. The final report of the Newburgh demonstration project, published in 1956 in the Journal of the American Dental Association, concluded that small concentrations of fluoride were safe for U.S. citizens. The biological proof, based on work performed at the University of Rochester Atomic Energy Project, was delivered by Dr. Hodge. Publicly, the safety verdict boosted federal efforts to promote water fluoridation. Privately, listen up here, the data was also helpful to the nuclear weapons industry, explained Heimer Friedman, the Manhattan Project's first medical director. Workers' alleged harmful exposure to fluoride would now find it more difficult to sue the government or its industrial contractors, Fried stated. Any claim about fluorides, here was the evidence that it was of no consequences, said Friedel. Anything that was evidence of a no effect level was important information, agreed the former Rochester science and historian J. Newell Stoddard. Although he claimed no knowledge of the medical section's role in the Newberg experiment, Heimer Frieder was not surprised that bomb program scientists had been involved. Well, there may have been some things done that were not ever in the record, he admitted, but there were records in the once secret archives of the Manhattan Project medical section. There exists an entire file on Newberg inside the file coded. It is coded GLO by the U.S. Army in its startling revelation. The top fluoride scientist for the U.S. Public Health Service, Dr. H. Trindley Dean, the man who later became famous as the father of fluoridation, had secretly opposed the Newberg fluoridation experiment, fearing fluoride's toxicity. Dean's opposition was a potential disaster. News that the leading fluoride scientist from the PHS was against adding fluoride to Newberg's water on the grounds of toxicity would certainly have frightened the Newberg citizens, perhaps aborted the nation's water fluoridation program entirely, and eventually have alerted nuclear workers to the dangers of handling fluorides. But Dean's dissent was never made public. Instead, Harold Hodge passed the troubling news on to Colonel Stafford Warren at Oak Ridge. Dear Staff, Hodge wrote on September 15, 1944, here is a copy of the current file relating to the Kingston-Newberg study. If desired, I would be glad to come down to your place and talk this problem over. Sincerely, Harold. Enclosed with Hodge's letter are key documents detailing the planning and protocol for the Newberg experiment. The Manhattan Project was indeed deeply interested in public water fluoridation. The papers included letters from Hodge to Newberg planners requesting additional bone studies, key information sought by the bomb program, and an agenda for meeting of the Newberg Technical Advisory Committee, with the word Warren scrawled across the top. The GIO file also records Dean's opposition to water fluoridation. His showdown with the Newberg planners occurred 2 p.m. on April 24, 1944, at the Department of Health offices at 80 Center Street in New York City, according to the advisory committee meeting minutes sent to Colonel Warren. Dr. Harold Hodge chaired the meeting. Almost immediately, a question of cumulative poisoning was raised. This is the crux of the whole problem of toxicity as it relates to this study, meeting notes record. Dr. Dean took the floor. The PHS expert explained that in parts of the country with high levels of groundwater fluoride, he had seen evidence of toxic effects in local residents, including bone changes and cataracts. He wanted more time to study lower concentrations to see at what level the effects disappeared, he told the committee. Dean worried that fluoride posed a special risk to the elderly, he told the committee, that he feared Newberg's residents might experience cumulative effects past middle age. The government experiment explained that if, for example, a person's kidneys did not work well, that person would be at greater risk for poisoning as more fluoride accumulated in their body. According to the Technical Advisory Committee meeting notes, an unanswered question about the pending experiment was what to look for in the way of evidence of early toxation. Dr. Dean recommended that both the child and the past middle age groups be considered. With the renal impairment, which is kidney impairment, common to older age groups, fluoride intake and output, even in small concentrations, may not be balanced. But Hodge and his Newburgh team were anxious to proceed. Much publicity had already been given to the proposed experiment, recalled Dr. Edward Rogers of the New York State Department of Health. Summarily, another advisory committee member, Dr. Philip J. from the University of Michigan, felt this was the propitious time for such a study from a psychological standpoint. Another committee member alluded to pressure from Washington policymakers. While her own feelings were conservative, noted Dr. Catherine Bain of the U.S. Department of Labor Child Bureau, the project had the approval of the Children's Bureau. The Children's Bureau was actually financing the Newburgh experiment. If this sounds a little bit misjointed, it's because I found a page of a page of a page of a page, and it is basically all one big piece of type. So what I'm trying to do as I'm reading it is I'm breaking apart the type. And they also have certain words that just kind of got inserted that I'm trying to scan out as I'm reading this to you. So where was I here? So yeah, the funding came from the Child's Bureau. Chairman Hodge called a final advisory committee vote at 4:15 p.m. on whether to proceed with the experiment. Dean was the lone voice in opposition. Dr. Dean did not agree that the proposed program could be considered a perfectly safe procedure from a public health point of view, the meeting minutes record. Nevertheless, the committee voted in favor of the experiments to fluoridate Newburgh's water. Shortly afterwards, as wartime pressures mounted in that summer of 1944, Dean performed an unreported but spectacular flip-flop, transforming himself from foe to friend of water fluoridation. Just 3 months after giving Newburgh the thumbs down, Dean announced that he now favored additional fluoride, adding fluoride to public drinking water in the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan. He would be one of the lead investigators comparing children's teeth for 10 years with another neighboring non-fluoridated city, Muskegon. 6 months later, on January the 25th, 1945, America's great fluoride experiment began. 107 barrels of sodium fluoride were delivered to Grand Rapids, where at 4 p.m., city technicians gingerly began tipping it into the city's drinking water supply. Dean's wartime gyration was well rewarded. In 1948, he was appointed the first director of the National Institute of Dental Research, and in 1953, he took a senior position. This is almost hard to read. I mean, come on. People that trust doctors really need to start reading some of this information, okay? They are the enemy, not our friends. I mean, not every one of them. I trust Dr. Seyfried, okay? I trust that man completely. If they said to me, we want to experiment on, I'd say, hey, go ahead, do it, okay? But I don't trust any of these people, but I will just back off and I will continue reading at this point. So yeah, Dean got quite a deal, right? He got to be the first director of the National Institute of Dental Research. And in 1953, he took a senior position with the American Dental Association. Until now, Dean's descent on Newburgh has how the Manhattan Project sold us fluoride has never been made public. The government has long dismissed claims that any of its scientists ever endorsed water fluoridation despite reservations regarding its safety. When the scientist and historian Newell Stannard was told of the once classified correspondence between Hodge and his Manhattan Project bosses on, on Newburgh, as well as the military's involvement in the public water fluoridation experiment, he was surprised but saw the logic. I don't think the military was really interested in water fluoridation. I think they were looking for information on toxicity, on fluoride and fluorides, he said. But former Newburgh Mayor Audrey Carey is appalled at the news that medical officials from the atomic weapons establishment secretly monitored and studied her fellow citizens during the Cold War. It is reprehensible. It is shocking. It reminds me of the experiments that were once done regarding syphilis down in Alabama, in which African Americans were not told they had the venereal disease so government doctors could study them, she said in an interview. Now, Carey wants answers from the government about the secret history of fluoride and about the Newburgh fluoridation experiment. I absolutely want to pursue it, she said. It is appalling to do any kind of experiment and study without people's knowledge and permission. Did Harold Hodge and the Rochester bomb scientists suppress or censor adverse health findings from the Newburgh study? There is some indication that they did. However, as we shall see, prying information from the University of Rochester's Cold War archive is no easy task, confounding the best efforts of a presidential commission in 1994. Evidence that military censors did remove information about fluoride's harmful effects can be seen in another study performed by Rochester Bomb Program scientists published in August the 1st, 1948 issue of the Journal of the American Dental Association. A comparison with the original unpublished secret version found by the medical writer Joel Griffiths in the files of the Manhattan Project medical section illustrates the ways Cold War authorities censored information on fluoride to the point of tragic comedy. In these files, Manhattan Project Captain Peter Dale at the University of Rochester reported in the second half of 1943 on the preliminary results of two dental investigations, a study of oral conditions among laboratory fluoride workers at Columbia University, and a study of dental conditions among workers exposed to dilute and anhydrous hydrochloric acid in production. The results from Columbia, where scientists at the War Research Laboratory were using fluoride to enrich uranium, were disappointing, even worrying. Fluoride did not prevent cavities, Captain Dale suggests. Of the 95 laboratory workers examined, the total number of tooth surfaces filled and attacked by cavities was not significantly altered by exposure to hydrochloric acid vapor, Dale reported. The fluoride might have been producing a harmful effect. Dr. Homer Priest, a leading fluoride scientist, reported that his teeth seemed to be deteriorating rapidly. Dr. Priest also told the medical section that his gums bled more freely and that there had been a progressive increase in the degree of slowness of healing and pain in the period he had been doing this work. The Columbia data was never published in the scientific literature, but the results of the second dental study on the laborers at the Harshaw Chemical Company in Cleveland became an important piece of evidence for the idea that fluoride reduces cavities. The study is particularly illustrative. As we saw earlier, work conditions at Harshaw Chemical Company were appalling. 2 workers had been killed by fluoride acid in 1945. So much fluoride and uranium was escaping from the plant that the FBI had been called in. And the Atomic Energy Commission proposed secretly tracking former workers to discover the incidence of lung cancer. None of that was made public, however. All that the medical community learned about Harshaw and fluoride was from a study published in the 1948 issue of the Journal of the American Dental Association, a study based on work performed for the Manhattan Project at the University of Rochester at the suggestion of Harold C. Hodge that reported that the men had better teeth. When compared with the original secret study, the published version reveals crude censorship and data distortion, according to the toxologist Phyllis Mullen, who read both versions. The secret version states that most of the men had few or no teeth. They were in large proportion toothless or nearly toothless. This information, however, was left off the published version. So I guess the original people they studied didn't have many teeth to begin with. I'll keep reading. The published study merely notes that the fluoride workers had fewer cavities. You got to admit, this is a pretty slick trick, right? they tested on people with not many teeth, so they could publish a study that merely notes that the fluoride workers had fewer cavities than did unexposed workers. The published version omits the suggestion that fluoride was actually harming the men's teeth, while the secret version states there was some indication teeth may have been etched and polished by the acid, and exposure of the teeth to the acid may have contributed to the attrition observed in the public version. Instead, they concocted an observation seen nowhere in the original. It states that, strangely enough, dental erosion or decalcification of enamel and dentin, commonly seen in workers exposed to inorganic acids or fluoride, was not seen. The published version omits information about the harmful effects that fluoride may have had on teeth, ignoring physical evidence that indicated otherwise. A lie, commented Mullinex. The published version had simply reversed the original medical observations that fluoride may have corroded and consumed the men's teeth, she said. The published version implies that the men were at fault for refusing to wear protective masks, instead preferring to chew tobacco or gum for protection. The secret study makes no mention of masks, and a later Ohio State study criticized Harshaw for not giving its workers protective masks. The published study states that men with clean mouths had good teeth. Men with neglected mouths had a peculiar brownish deposit which seemed to cover the enamel of the interior teeth in large quantities. The secret version, however, made no distinction in the men's oral hygiene, noting that all men, as a group, neglected their mouths. The published report therefore makes the bad or discolored teeth appear to be the worker's fault. The dirty brown teeth were now a function of the men's hygiene. Mullinex remarked, in other words, blaming the victims for not having a clean mouth. The published Harshaw study helped to shift the national medical debate over exposure to industrial fluoride. Several studies during the 1940s had already shown that acid in an industrial environment hurt workers' teeth, and Dr. Priest's experiment at Columbia University suggested that the same was happening with wartime fluoride workers. Now, said Phyllis Mullinex, instead of blaming fluoride for eroding teeth with the help of a clever editing job, the published study became a piece of dental propaganda that buries the American fluoride worker. It totally changes the viewpoint, Molex told me. It makes me ashamed to be a scientist. Of other Cold War era fluoride safety studies, she says, were they all done like this? Recently in Cleveland, a roomful of surviving Harshaw fluoride workers erupted in grim laughter when told about Harold Hodges' censored dental study. I showed Alan Hunt the once secret results of the long-term measures of fluoride in his urine, analyzed by the AEC doctors at the University of Rochester. The fluoride was recorded at the extraordinarily high levels of 17.8 mil per liter. Today he is plagued with arthritis, he says, while many of his Harshaw friends died young of cancer. Nevertheless, smiling a largely toothless grin, Hurt commented on the published dental study. Well, they had to come up with something. And I will be, I'm just going to leave this. I recorded this all on its own, so I'll insert this into the show. I will do that right now.